Kamala Harris must not become president, but she will win the election. She'll win it in the same way that Putin wins the elections in Russia, by hustling and conniving, by sheer violence, and by bribery. Let me stop and remind myself that we lost this battle in the 1970s when there was such a profound change in our society. They threw out God and country, the idea of straightening up our emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the third day. And in psychology, they threw out the idea of being a normal, well-adjusted person because that's not a natural thing. That was when they decided that homosexuality was no longer considered an illness, and the bum's rush there was they threw out those three things that make up God and country. Being a normal, well-adjusted person, the disposition of willing the good of another person, and then doing it because Christ rose on the third day, or the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and that sort of thing. In the political, they threw out the idea of being, well, a good citizen. Our citizenry was being not a natural thing at all. It's not a natural thing to be a normal person, and that's what qualified you to be a good citizen. Then you were a good husband to a wife, a good father to the children, and you were a good citizen, and we had the benefits of that, a huge middle class. In economics, they threw out home economics, the idea that the married couple is a base economic unit, and you picture a detached house, and that's what gets you out of poverty and into plenty, and there are rules that govern that. They threw that out. And in the legal, courts came out and said there will be no religion in government, and in doing so, they took the classical definition of a satanic church. They just snuck that one in. With it, they institutionalized pulling a bum's rush of hustling, and they institutionalized the idea of making money by causing other people to have to work more hours. They did away with middle class, and they put in a peasant and property class society with themselves as the upper class. They're considered the bad guys here. Before we go any farther, I get to sneak something in about lawyers. Years ago, when I was putting effort into this, lawyers had a totem pole. This is when society is cashing in on everything. And at the bottom of their totem pole were criminal trial attorneys and prosecutors. And at the top of their totem pole were real estate attorneys and tax attorneys and stockbroker attorneys. They made about 3.5 times as much. The criminal trial attorneys and prosecutors, they were considered not very bright and not very smart. And when you looked at them and asked why were they considered that, that was because of their disposition of defending the poor and the oppressed. And there was a very low value given on that. At the other end, the stockbroking attorneys and real estate attorneys, they would get into property and rent it out to you. They wouldn't produce anything. They were professional consumers, and they caused you to have to work more hours. They caused poverty, and in the Bible, that's considered one of the unforgivable sins. They couldn't care less. They had no empathy, no love in them, and there was a positive value placed on that. They were considered smart and intelligent. They call themselves a class of intellectuals. The Catholics would call them satanic. It's just value judgment names given to the same thing. And ironically, those criminal trial attorneys and prosecutors, who in this camp are considered the good guys, they would end up defending the same system that they were trying to stand up against. And it's just the way it was. Let me remind myself also that there's an idea, a tendency to go from the liberal back to the conservative, or from the Democrat back to the Republican. You can't do that. This isn't even a Donald Trump position. It has nothing to do with what Donald Trump wants to do going out. He's very much within the curbs of the road. That's all we care about. This is a position that you go behind Donald Trump's back and straighten everything out. And once that's straightened out, then guys like Donald Trump will be in their glory, and they go to work and take it from there. So what's wrong? What do you do about it, and how do you do it? What's wrong? They threw out God and country. Saying these thoughts that have to do with fear, sex, ignorance, and violence are just that. And then the placing of a priority of one decent thing over the other, and the other things that go with it. A huge middle class, home economics, and that sort of thing. What do you do about it? You go back to God and country. Instead of courts saying you can have no religion, you replace them with judges that say you can have only religion, or you institutionalize the Apostles' Creed. Let me say things my way. Judges wear black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in England wore black robes. And the idea that the priest is a good guy and the pimp was a bad guy, people who hustled were considered bad, the malicious. And so the laws discriminated against them and favored the good guys. And they threw all that out. And so if I can't be an American Yank without officially being Catholic, well, then I'll be officially Catholic. And now an American Yank will appear. Oh, philosophical fancy pants me. How do you do it? It's a 4-stage process. The first stage is to publicize a sense of original sin. This goes against the chimpanzee side of us, and it's a learned thing. It's this other nature. And you have to be taught that. It's actually what I think of when I think of university professors and the ideal society. And it's not those university professors, but it is the other intellectual position. It's the other religious position as well. The other 3 stages go together. If you can't turn to the cops, you turn to the lawyers. You can't turn to the lawyers, you turn to the courts. And if the courts are screwing up, then you follow in the footsteps of our founding fathers. You turn to the citizenry. You take a step back, grab your 3-cornered hat and fife and drum, and go downtown and remove the bums and get those bums out of there. I'm sure they won't use violence against us. Yeah, right, that's a joke. And you replace them with our attorneys. Instead of taking over the place, you find those poor prosecutors and trial attorneys that we were defending, and you put them back in, and there you go. At the Supreme Court level, well, you have a nice little march, and I'm sure the people in the Supreme Court will stand down and go get a garbage sack and go form a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. And you might keep Clarence Thomas to make the point, because he's one of the few people left that can write the laws that go from positive divine law to natural law and all that fancy stuff. They can put curbs on the road. Here in Tucson, you would stand down, you would go over to the courts, you would replace those judges with our judges, and then you might walk the short distance between the courthouse and the University of Arizona, and I'm sure they would stand down if most of those departments, if a great deal of the University of Arizona disappeared tomorrow, the standard of living in Tucson would pop right up. And you would replace them with a College of Home Economics, and everything would start to change. That would be phase 1. Phase 2, you would go between Tucson and Tombstone, and you would set the ladder straight. The people in the 1970s that got into all the gold and real estate, I'm sure they would give back their wealth and go grab a garbage sack and go start picking up the slums. And then we would turn around and find the home economists, and they get to live in a house if they're going to change the dirty diapers. And they get to play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. And if you're going to be a guy that comes across with the bicycles at Christmas time for a junior, then you get to be the carpenter and plumber that lives in a house. You don't rent property to people, you don't rent property from people. And that would be phase 2. And then in phase 3, you build, man, build. You Darwinize to heaven. There's a detached house. You start off with farming and mining, then manufacturing, then wholesale, retail, and repair, and then retirement, education, and recreation. And the good guy doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice, and the priest is what causes it all to come into being. And then you start to Darwinize to heaven. You get to a maintenance level. So until there's a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. And that's the sort of thing you do. We'll get started. There's no time like the present. Nice and hard and fast. So you go get those. It's up to you. You go get those attorneys and the good guy police and the good guy plumbers and union guys. When faced with institutional corruption, you turn to individual effort, and it's just going to be up to you. If it's by race, you're going to have to stand up to your race. If it's by gender, you're going to have to be a man or be a woman. It might be union or management, and you're going to have to stand up to the management if you're a management guy. And everything's going to be a bit backwards that way. Well, that's okay. We can get through that. So I'm going to try and be on the air in the evenings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I hope I'll have some time. I hope to be on the air twice a day. And if you get enough people together, we join our gang in the playground. We'll ask you what to do about all this. I'm sure there's something we can do. We'll see you then.